Hello, welcome to my channel. This is a portrait of Michelle Pfeiffer. It's based on an older reference photo and it was done mostly in charcoal. I mostly used a woodless charcoal pencil and some vine charcoal. But in addition to that, I also used some other tools which I'm going to talk about in a minute. As you can see, this is a very detailed, realistic portrait, and I picked the reference photo because it had a nice lighting and some interesting shadows on her face, and also some nice transitions between the areas of lighter and darker value. Now I have to tell you that normally I find female portraits more difficult to draw than the male portraits, because especially portraits of younger women, because of all of these smooth transitions, which make it a little bit difficult to show the shape of the face and the topography of the face. But now I'm gonna take you through the drawing process and we're gonna have a look at how I did it. So let's go. So in addition to charcoal, I also used graphite pencils and a black colored pencil, and I used a graphite pencil not only for sketching, but as you will see later, for shading as well. What I'm using right now is a vine charcoal stick, and I'm going to use it in a combination with a charcoal pencil to cover most of this background to the left. The background in my reference photo is also fairly dark, even though I decided to simplify it a little bit. So the good thing about vine charcoal is that you can cover all of this carelessly, and because it's so easily moved and blended, you can just blend it in or remove it if you want. Now I decided to blend it with my finger because it's quick and I think it'll work well in this particular case. But one of the things that you have to remember with vine charcoal is that when you start blending it, you will often make it lighter than it initially was, because you lift up a little bit of the charcoal and a little bit of that value. So I think the trick here, or at least what worked for me, is to keep my finger on the paper at all times. That helps me control the amount of value and make everything smoother. Now, because I wanted some areas of even darker value, which I'm not getting with vine charcoal, I decided to put some compressed charcoal in a charcoal pencil over the vine charcoal and to blend it both using my finger and brushes. I first pushed it around with my finger and blended it thoroughly, and then I sort of went over it with a larger brush and made everything a lot smoother, as you can see. So now we have a nice smooth background with some variation, with some darker and lighter tones, and that'll help us create some depth and make our subject pop out, because I need that dark background because I'm going to be drawing highlights with my pencil eraser, as you can see now. I'm going to be pulling these highlights, trying to draw some of these flyaway hairs, which should stand out nicely against the dark background. So because of the light source, this part of her hair will be a lot lighter, and her hair is lighter obviously anyway, so I want this part of her hair to stand out, and I'm carefully pulling these individual strands of hair, but I actually need to do this quite a few times because in order to make it look realistic, I need to sort of layer them and stack them one on top of the other and give them some more density to create an illusion like there's a lot of them. So far so good, and I'm going to leave that part on the left for now, and I'm moving on to the facial features, and I'm drawing the eyes. We're going to have a nice reflection in the eye, which I'm not going to cover with any charcoal, but in order for that reflection to really stand out, I'm going to have to shade everything around it. And I often talked about this when drawing portraits, that when you're shading, everything is as dark or as light as the area next to it or around it. So as you can see, I had to shade the eyeball very lightly, but at the same time put in enough value in it so that the highlight in the eye would stand out. And also, because the eyeball is round, it's a round surface, I always try to shade the corners a little bit more and then make it a little bit lighter towards the iris. And now I'm shading, or rather drawing, some darker areas in between the hair and the face, and now I'm moving on to the parting here. The hair around the parting is going to be a little bit darker. So my approach when I have these transitions is to put down the area of darker value and then push the charcoal towards the areas of lighter value with a brush or some other blending tool. Now with the other eye, I'm doing the same thing that I did with the left one. I'm reserving that white space for the highlight, and I'm shading all around it. But I'm also going to do a little bit of work on the nose and some other parts of the face. As you can see, I like to be all over the place when I'm shading, because that way I can kind of gauge more easily how much value I need in certain areas. Now the face has some very interesting shadows which are casted by the nose and on the right side by the hair, and I'm going to have to try to convey all of that and make it look as realistic as possible. As for the forehead and my approach to shading it, I used graphite pencil for very light shading, and then I kind of pushed some charcoal into that, and then on top of that I added some vine charcoal to the darker area under her hair, all the way to the right and all the way to the left of the face. So these are some of the darker areas of the face where the hair is kind of casting a shadow on the face. And now I'm trying to add some more shadows on the forehead, because some of these hairs on her bangs are casting their own shadow on the forehead, and I thought it was a very interesting thing to capture because it will help us create depth. And the reason why I'm doing this with a graphite pencil is because, first of all, there's no way I could do it with a charcoal pencil. It would be too dark and I would produce too much texture. Now if I try to do it with a tortillon, that could work, but it wouldn't produce a very clean edge. The thing is that these shadows, casted shadows from the hair, have a little bit of a clean edge, and the edges are a little bit more defined. So I wanted to do that with a graphite pencil, and then I blended it in and softened it a little bit later. Now you can see I'm trying to add some more value to the hair on the left, because I can't leave it completely white. So I'm gently pushing some charcoal and graphite towards those highlights on the left. And now I'm working on the nose and the nostrils, and the lighting here is very complex, so I'm really pushing myself to try to understand the shape of the nose and the mouth. The thing is that these portraits which have complex lighting and lots of these shadows or lots of reflected light and things like that, they can be extremely difficult to draw. They can be very difficult to cope with, because at the same time you're trying to achieve likeness, and all of these shadows can be a little bit confusing. But at the same time, if you get it right, you can create a very nice looking portrait, and a very realistic looking portrait, because these shadows really add a lot to the realism and the feeling of depth, and they really give a shape to your subject. Now, a few words about the subject. Obviously, as you probably know, Michelle Pfeiffer is a great actress, and I picked this reference photo, which is a very old reference photo. She was very young when this was taken. I picked it because of two reasons. First, because she looks nice in it, but my main reason were these shadows and the lighting. And I also like the way her head is tilted, so I think it's a very good photo for a portrait. Obviously I made some changes to it, but I think I captured the stuff that I find the most interesting. Now, what you see me doing now is I drew in this darker area just under the ear to the right and around the neck. Now, as I've already mentioned, I like to be all over the place when I'm drawing my portraits, and the reason why I put in this darker area was not only to give myself a feeling of where the edge of the face and the neck should be, but also to give myself an idea how dark the rest of the face should be. So I'm using that darker area as a sort of a reference so that I can gauge the amount of value that I need in other areas of the face. That's one of the reasons why I always recommend that you should be all over the place when you're drawing a portrait. It just helps you kind of get a better idea about how much value you need in other parts of the face when you're drawing a portrait. Here I sharpened my charcoal pencil a little bit, and I'm trying to refine the edge of her face here, because I'm shaving off just a little bit just to make sure that the shape of her cheekbones is good. I think the face was just a little bit too wide, so I narrowed it down a little bit. And I also have a lot of work to do around the eyes, because the shadows are also making it a little bit difficult for me to understand where the eyelashes end and this darker area around begins. There's also, as you can see, a very nice shadow on the right casted by the nose. And now I'm trying to now I'm adding some more value to pretty much all parts of my portrait, because at this point I felt like everything was looking a little bit too flat, but at the same time I had everything in place, so it was time to start adding a little more value to certain areas, to get a little bit more bold and to try to push the contrast a little bit more. Now, if you see some dots or spots on the left cheek, that's a side effect of combining different media. That happens when you use a combination of charcoal and graphite. Graphite is a lubricant, and sometimes you will get these weird effects, like for example when you're touching your drawing with the dirty fingers. So you will sometimes get these small blemishes, but it's not a problem because I can easily remove that by dabbing it with kneaded eraser. So I'm gonna make everything smoother. The thing that I'm mainly concerned now with is shading the face and making everything as dark or as light as it's supposed to be. So now I'm finishing on the eyelashes and this transition between the forehead and the nose, where I need to do a little bit more shading, and the lips as well. There's some more shadows here as well. So as you can see now, I'm all over the place, just adding a little bit more value wherever needed until I'm happy with the way it looks. This area to the right especially I felt needed to be even darker because it's all in the shadow. Because even when you have an area that's in the shadow, there is still some variation of tone in there as well. There are some shadows are darker than others, obviously. And another thing is that some of these shadows, as you can see from these casted shadows by the individual hairs on her forehead, some of these shadows have a cleaner edge than others. So these are all of the things that you need to keep in mind, that some of these areas will have a smoother, softer transition, others will have a cleaner edge, etc. And here I decided to move on to the right side of the background because I was pretty happy with the way the face was going. I still have more work to do around the neck and maybe a little bit around the cheeks and maybe some highlights here and there, but the face was mostly done at this point, so I decided to move on to the background. Vine charcoal is a really great tool for drawing. I really like the feel. It has a nice feel to it when you're applying it to paper. It goes very smoothly and it's also very easy to manipulate and blend. It's a pleasure to work with, even though it can be very messy. And it's a very, very useful tool to use to complement your drawings in addition to charcoal pencils. I don't know why I didn't start using it earlier, because for a very long period I tried drawing just with charcoal pencils, and even though it is possible to create some nice drawings using only charcoal pencils, Vine charcoal makes shading a lot easier. And the thing about these backgrounds and these darker areas, like the one that I just shaded around her neck, is that even when you're using a combination of compressed charcoal and Vine charcoal will make it easier to blend the compressed charcoal. It makes everything easier to move around and to create a smoother looking area. As you can see, I've done most of the background, and I just need to put in a little more detail in the hair, and then I'm going to sharpen my pencil eraser and start pulling some highlights to make that hair a little more interesting. So you can see that I'm now using that pencil eraser and I'm pulling these flyaway hairs so that they can stand out against the background, but also here around the neck, and there's some shadows here as well. So I'm doing all of this to make the hair look more detailed and realistic. Obviously I'm not going to draw every single hair, but just a few suggestions here and there will go a long way. And I'm going to use that same pencil eraser to erase my signature here on the left. Slowly and carefully, just writing down my initials, which is M and Sh in Cyrillics. And now the portrait is pretty much done. I'm just going to do a few more flyaway hairs here and maybe fix that lower right corner a little bit, because the tape was there, so maybe I'm just gonna clean that up a little bit. And the portrait is done. I hope you like it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Give me a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and also don't forget to check out my other videos. I have plenty of other stuff, and thank you for watching. Bye.